hip-hop soul in the crowd. Yeah.
All right, everybody, welcome back in. It is the Rob Stu Show. Tough weekend for the boys. Tough weekend. If you're passing by a church, light a candle for us after that Preakness weekend. Tough scenes. We'll be at the Roy Rogers on the.
Thanks, Irad. Thanks for spending Blazing Sevens 4 wide the whole month. Really
the Roy Rogers on the New Jersey Turnpike late nights this week, trying to recoup some money back, but. We're going to stay, unfortunately, we're going to try and change our luck here. We're going to stay, unfortunately, in the great state of Maryland. We're going to talk about something a little bit better than horses running in circles. That is the Baltimore Orioles, the O's, the red-hot O's, talking with our guy, Connor Newcomb of Locked on O's. Brother, good to have you back on, man. Always a fun time and a great start to a really interesting season for your Orioles.
Yeah, thank you both for having me back on. And I mean, things are going well. It's funny. It was, as you mentioned, Preakness weekend in Baltimore, and not that it wasn't a big deal, because it's always a big deal. It's, one third of the Triple Crown is right here, just outside the city. And, you get a bunch of people, that come to the race, and Bruno Mars performs in the infield. But with the O's playing this well, it does come down a little tick, because some more people, they want to check out the O's maybe instead of tuning into the race at 7:01 on a Saturday evening. So it does give a little bit of a different vibe to Preakness weekend when the O's are this good.
Yeah, I know a lot of people were talking about that week, Thursday, Friday, going to the ballpark, catching a game, especially that Friday. So, hey, always good to help out the Angelos. They need the extra money. They need it. They really do. This Orioles team, though, I mean, if it wasn't for the Rays' amazing start, the Orioles would be putting together something real special, even more so than what it is, I think, on paper. For you, I watched the O's. I've got Masson. Rob just wishes he had a team half as good as the Orioles. I watch this
right
team.
now. Yeah.
I watch every
homegrown
game.
guys, easy guys to root for.
That's it. Yeah, homegrown guys. So either the hitting's coming on, the bullpen has really come on. Starting pitching, I still am iffy about. The hitting is, every single night it's a new guy. I don't know if that's sustainable. What are so far your general feelings about where the positives are, where the question marks, maybe negatives are?
I think the first positive is it's a legitimately good team. Like, it's not just a lucky team. It's not just a team on a winning streak. It's not even like last year's team that, gets hot in the second half and ends up kind of stumbling into a playoff race that they never thought they'd be in. They missed the playoffs by 3 games, but you're looking at a team 31-16 as we record here before Tuesday night's game in the Bronx, and they've got the second best record in baseball. As you mentioned, if the Rays weren't on this pace, I wish the Orioles would have played the Rays more already. Like, they've taken 2 out of 3 from Tampa in the only series they've played. None of these other teams can beat Tampa, but the Orioles apparently can.
In the last few years too, Connor, those have been some bloodbath series for the O's. And
yes,
that's an early sign. That's an early sign.
2 years ago, Tampa was 18-1 against the Orioles in the 19 games in the season series. So a little bit better already when you can get more wins in one series than you did in one entire year against a divisional opponent. But I think that's the number one thing, is that they're actually good. I mean, the bullpen is just as good, if not better, than it was last year. And it was the bullpen that just kind of dragged them along for a while last season when they started winning games. You could argue they're better because Felix Bautista looks just as good. And then Yennier Cano has become, out of nowhere, the best reliever in baseball as the setup man. You add that to an offense that has been in the top 10 basically in baseball all year. It's never been really number one, but they've been above league average the entire season in basically every statistical category. They're walking more. They're striking out a little less. They're hitting homers, but not as many as they used to. Some of that's the new wall at Camden Yards. But they're getting on base. They're hitting with runners in scoring position, which always is going to lead to runs for you. And they're getting things done. And they have the most comeback wins in baseball as well. They've been really good late in games, 7th inning or later. Now, you mentioned the starting pitching. It still leaves some to be desired. But in May, the starters have an ERA right around 3. So they've kind of pulled it together a little bit over the last few weeks. And it's still going to be the weak link of the team until they would maybe make a trade at the deadline, hopefully. But the team's good enough right now and has enough young talent that I don't see this just being a team where, they still end up winning only 80 games and they just, beat the soft part of their schedule. Like, they are legitimately a good team, a legitimate playoff contender. They are not a World Series contender yet, but this is a team that really could be playing in October, which is wild to say when you think about just this time last year. They were 10 games under 500 and still looked like they were in the middle of a rebuild.
Yeah, it's funny. Last year I was down around Memorial Day. I was down in Baltimore, and we were headed to Annapolis, but we stayed one night in Baltimore. And I remember going to the casino there, and the bartender was telling me, he's like, oh, the team, they're off to a bad start. They have some young guys, though. We think they can improve. I remember betting them. I think they played like a doubleheader that day versus Boston, Memorial Day weekend last year. And that's when they really started to pick it up. I mean, and in the second half of the season, they were a different team. They've just been fun to watch, honestly. Like, I'm more of a gambler when it comes to baseball. I mean, obviously, I'm a Phillies fan, but I gamble every night, obviously, and I lose a ton. But I love betting their overs. I mean, their overs are money, man. I mean, they're just a fun team to watch. They'll be down 5-0, and then boom, it's 6-5, 7-5. They're right back in the game. To me, as a gambler, I mean, me and Stu do it a lot on the show. We talk gambling. I absolutely love playing their overs.
It's something they'll do out of nowhere. Just the last game they were on the field, Sunday, they're in a 2-2 game into extra innings, and all of a sudden it's 3-3, and then the Orioles put up a 5 spot in the top of the 11th. And I'm sure that probably hit the over right there. But B, it's like they've got the offense to where, teams are trying to get that one run across in extra innings. You get that runner on second, you're trying to just get that guy across, give yourself a chance. When you put up 5 in the top of the inning, you've demoralized your opponent at that point.
Oh, yeah.
And that's exactly what they did. And they swept the Blue Jays over the weekend. And it is fun baseball to watch because they really aren't out of games. One of their most impressive games this year was actually a loss. They entered the bottom of the 9th inning back in April. They were down 8-1 against the Red Sox in the bottom of the 9th inning.
I remember
they
that
end up
game.
scoring 5 runs in that 9th inning and getting, I believe, the tying run to the plate and forcing the Red Sox to eventually bring in Kenley Jansen. And it was early in the series, which helped. So you get their closer to be used. And it was just like, even when this team was good, if it's 8-1 in the 9th, I mean, I don't mind if guys just roll over 3 times and get ready for the next day. It's 8-1.
Yeah.
And they rallied against a division opponent like that. And that they've done it all year. And I mean, even on Saturday in Toronto, I mentioned the Sunday game, they're down 5-2 in the 8th. They bring in Jordan Romano, the Blue Jays closer. He was an all-star last year. And the O's got Ryan O'Hearn at the plate, who they got off the scrap heap, who hit 1 homer in 150 plate appearances with the Royals last year and then got DFA'd. And he goes deep to tie the game with a 3-run homer. They're using all 26 guys on the roster. They're all contributing, and they're never out of a game, which does make it really fun.
They're kind of like they remind me a little bit of the Miami Heat as far as the NBA, where it's kind of a roster of just unknown, I don't want to say unknown because Cedric Mullins is,
but it's kind of like Adley Rutschman is Jimmy Butler. And then he's just got all these guys around him who any given night, it could be Nick Vincent, it can be Duncan Robinson, it can be whomever. And any given night, it's going to be one of those guys.
I got to show you the Twitter history offline. Bad stuff.
I only have one more question for you, and Stu can get to his question for you. What kind of moves would you see them doing at the deadline? The way this team is moving, you would think if they could add something, what do you think you could see them targeting? And will ownership spend a little bit of the money? I know that was their thing in the offseason. A lot of the fans weren't too happy that they wouldn't spend.
Yeah, they basically didn't spend it all. I mean, they brought in 3 major league free agents. They were all on 1-year deals. It was Adam Frazier for $8 million, Michael Givens for $5 million, and Kyle Gibson for $10 million. Those are not exactly the signings that are going to light the world on fire. They're nice veterans who maybe raise the floor of your roster a little bit. That's about it. And
No,
so
I know Kyle Gibson well.
yeah, and he's been better than he was last year in Philly, which has been nice for the Orioles, but he's still not, he's not anything close to any kind of top of the rotation pitcher that you would bring
like
in.
Said, he's a veteran. Yeah, he's a veteran 4-starter. I mean,
and that's nice, but when you don't have a 1 or 2 starter, those 4 starters don't help you out as much when you have a bunch of 3s and 4s in your rotation. That's essentially what the Orioles have. So the obvious answer is go get, at the very least, a very good number 2 and hopefully a number 1 at the trade deadline. Some of those guys are going to be available. It's going to be really interesting to see what the Orioles are willing to do, because some of those guys are going to be rentals. Eduardo Rodriguez going to be a rental because he's going to opt out of his deal. Lucas
We'll give
Giolito.
them to you for, just 2 names. Give us Kyle Stowers and Joey Ortiz. That'll be fine. Yeah, we'll take those 2 guys, and then, you can have Rodriguez if you want.
Yeah, and some of these guys are going to be rentals. Giolito will be a rental, like even a Lance Lynn type who can pitch well in the postseason. He'll be a rental. I don't think the Orioles are going to go after a rental because they know they're not going to re-sign him. So they're not going to get a guy who they can't re-sign and give up prospects for it. So then you really got to dig deep and go get a guy who's got 2+ years of control. I fear that what they'll do is go get just another number 3 starter and say, technically this guy upgrades the rotation because he's better than one of our current 5 starters. And that'll be nice. It'll probably make the team a little better. But I don't think they can really make a run without a true guy they can send out there every 5 days and know that they're going to get a really, really strong start. And so that's the number 1 place I'd go. The other place I would look is at a kind of a veteran left-handed hitting power bat for the Orioles. I just think at Camden Yards now, with the Wall move back in left field, the right-handed power hitters are kind of handcuffed a little bit, and they don't really have like the Chris Davis of old presence in the lineup right now. I mean, Mullins is great and Rutschman's great, and both those guys, either switch hitter or left-handed hitter, but they're not really true, I'm scared of a home run at any time power bats. And I think one of those guys in the middle of the order would be really, really nice for the O's. That's what I'd like to see them do. My prediction is more like they add another number 3 starter who's a little better than somebody else in their rotation, and they just kind of ride the young guys and say, they've gotten us this far. They keep calling up more and more prospects and say, let's see what they can do down the stretch here.
Last Orioles question, because I know we wanted to pick your brain on some different MLB topics, but Gunnar Henderson, my prodigal son. I keep watching him. I think the at-bats in general are good. He's at least drawing walks. He gets on base. He's still got some pop. He's hitting a home run here or there. He'll get a base hit here or there. The defense is adequate. It's pretty decent, fair to decent. Is it too soon? Are you willing to let him play this season out and learn? Or is it? I know he was set down for a little bit back down to Norfolk just to kind of work some things out, and Joey Ortiz came up immediately. Has been kind of in the same boat. Quality, putting in some quality at bats, just it's not falling in the right holes. What do you think about those 2 players specifically?
Yeah, for Henderson, I'm willing to leave him here all year. And there would obviously come a point where you'd have to do something different, right? Like maybe you wouldn't play him almost every day. And he's also playing every single day right now because Ramon Arias is on the injured list. He had been kind of the starting third baseman. So Gunner's going to get out there every single day at this point, even when he's struggling. Now, a positive is, as you mentioned, he's still walking. He's still got one of the best walk rates on the team in the American League. He's still playing good enough defense at third base to stick him out there every night. Now, he's not hitting lefties super well, so he's still not playing much against left-handers, or when he does, he's hitting, 8th or 9th in the order at this point. But he was the number 1 prospect in baseball last year for a reason. He came up and had a lot of success last September when he got his first call up for a reason. He's got a big power bat. He's got a really good eye. The strikeouts are an issue, and he's hitting the ball hard. You kind of look at his charts on his hard hit percentage. It's getting higher and higher as the season goes on. It's at its highest point right now. And so he's hitting the ball harder and harder, but he needs to make a little more contact. He's striking out too much for that hard hit percentage to help him and for his luck to turn, basically. Because if you're just putting the ball in play again and again, you keep hitting it hard, at some point your luck will turn. But if you're striking out a lot, You don't give yourself as many chances for that luck to turn around. I do think it will here pretty soon. I think one thing he started doing a little bit more recently, he just came off like a 6-game hitting streak that ended last week. So that was a nice little spot for him. I believe it was only 1 hit in each of the 6 games, but it still makes you feel good being on a hitting streak there. One thing that I think he's come out of a little bit is he was actually being too passive early in the year. Now it was helping with walks, but he would take, a 1-0 fastball down the middle. And then maybe he'd walk on a 3-2 count, but you're thinking of Gunnar Henderson of last year. That 1-0 fastball is probably a double last year. And instead he's taking a walk, which still helps the team. But also if you're letting yourself those pitches by, that's probably the best pitch you're going to see in at bat. So he's been more and more aggressive. I think June is going to be a big month for him. I think he's going to break out of it. And I will say, unless the strikeout rate like stays 30% or above and the average stays well below 200, basically through June and into July, I think that's when the O's would maybe start to think about, okay, we're still in a playoff spot. Do we maybe need to send him down for some fine tuning? But I would say we're still at least a month away from that decision being made.
It's a huge series this week on with the Yankees. I mean, the Yankees are starting to play, pretty good baseball. They've put together some wins for some bad teams, but they're starting to put it together. Judge is finally getting hot. He seemed kind of cold there. Even on the fan, I listen to a lot when I'm at work. They were getting on, believe it or not, they were getting on Judge. They were getting on the whole team, but they seemed over the past 2 weeks, they're 8-2 in their last 10. They've been playing better. This is going to be a really good series this early, this early series. It's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, it should be good. And I am a little worried just because of the pitching matchups. So you send Garrett Cole out there in game 1, and he's been great this year. I mean, he might get that Cy Young this year with just the way he's been looking so far this season. And obviously he's always been good against the Orioles. The one that does give me a little pause is Nestor Cortez is also going to pitch in this series, and he's really struggled this year. I mean, he was like one of the reasons the Yankees had such a great year last year was because Cortez was so dominant. He hasn't been very good this year, but historically he has been unhittable against the Orioles. Like he's had some of his best career starts against the O's. And that even was last year as well, against a very similar lineup to what he would be facing this year. So I worry about those pitching matchups that even if the Orioles continue to throw the ball well, there might not be a lot of runs coming their way in this series, but this is going to be another test. Like you just go in, you sweep the Blue Jays in Toronto, but now it's the Yankees. And as good as the Blue Jays are the Yankees. And going into Yankee Stadium and winning the series is different than going into Toronto. It just is, especially when you've been the Orioles for this long and you know what happens a lot of the time when you've played the Yankees. So I think we could learn a lot about the O's in this series too.
What's your thoughts? This season's been wonky, man. I mean, between the AL Central being one of the most vile pieces of trash I have ever seen put onto a baseball.
It's god-awful.
It is just God. It's Tom Hanks from Philadelphia. That's what it is. And you look around, you see the Cardinals struggling at one point, 10 games below 500. I mean, I know it's early and everything. You've seen some like teams that you just don't expect across baseball struggling. What's the most shocking, surprising thing you've seen outside of Baltimore in terms of just sheer either incompetence or brilliance? Provided, yes, the Rays are it's a pretty impressive start, but still, there's some really bad baseball out there.
I'll give you kind of one on each side. I'll say the positive surprise probably been the Rangers. I know they spent a lot of money this offseason to add to that team, but the fact that they basically haven't had Jacob deGrom, like he was the guy. It's like you went and got, when healthy, the best pitcher in baseball. Mm-hmm. And as they probably expected, he's not going to make 30 starts, but he's on pace to make 15 starts at this point this year? I would have thought, if you told me that, I would have said, well, the Rangers are going to win 81 games again, basically. And they didn't have Corey Seager for a while. They didn't have deGrom, and they're in first place in the AL West. And so that's been pretty surprising. O's did take 2 or 3 from them. They'll also host them in Camden Yards this weekend. That's going to be a really, really fun series after that Yankee series. The disappointment really for me, I mean, what's going on with the Padres? I mean, speaking of spending money, I mean, that's not just a team that did it this year. They have continued to do it, and they've brought in stars. Like the Rangers brought in good players, adding like Nathan Eovaldi's been great. Marcus Semion's been great. But the Padres are adding guys who could be like future Hall of Famers to that lineup. They get Tatis back too, which should have helped, and he's been solid. But you're looking at Bogarts, Soto, Tatis, and they haven't been very good. Now, Machado's on the injured list. He hasn't been great. So that's been one. I mean, he was an MVP candidate last year. But still, even without him, you got 3 perennial all-stars at the top of your order. The issue for the Padres has been all those guys who kind of play those like in-between roles. You know, they play first base and left field and third base, and they somehow hit, you know, just they hit 280 and they do just enough to get on base for the big bats. Feels like all those guys have been bad this year. The pitching hasn't been good enough for the Padres. They don't really have a good bullpen. And I just look at them and it's like, and I've heard people say this, what can they do if they're still kind of 500 mediocre by the deadline? Because they have legitimately traded away all of their prospects. They do not have any prospects to trade away to get another good big leaguer. So I'm really intrigued by them because the Dodgers, people thought they'd take a step back. Now they're in first place again. The Diamondbacks are pretty fun. They look like a pretty solid team in that division. I'm really intrigued by what they're kind of similar to the Orioles timeline wise and what's going on in Arizona. I'm really intrigued to see what the Padres do here because they could just turn it around because they have so much talent on the team. They could just easily turn it around, but they're already building such a giant hole behind the Dodgers. They're not going to win the division, even if they turn it around. And if they're in a wild card series again, who knows what could happen? And it could be a disappointing Padres year.
You know, baseball, like any other sport, to me, you know, your best things are when you draft well and they come up in your system. And the Padres are a lot like my Phillies, right? They didn't have great farm systems. I mean, the Padres probably had one of the better ones at one time. They got Tatis. They got, you know, don't get me wrong, they had players that came up.
You're on the Dombrowski plan. Let's not forget
well, with Dombrowski, he's done a great job. He hasn't had nobody to trade, right? So he's not. Phillies had a bad farm system to begin with, but the Phillies and the Padres both, they're in the similar spots. The Padres remind me of the Phillies last year. You have all these big free agents that come here, you spend all this money, but a lot of these guys haven't played a lot together. And I think one thing in baseball, like you see with a younger team like the Orioles, like the Diamondbacks, when these guys come up together, or they, you know, they played together for a while, they're just they're familiar with each other. They know everybody's moves. I think when you bring in a lot of these free agents, these types of teams, it takes time for them to gel, especially in baseball. There's so many games. So I do think there's plenty of times with the Padres, but a lot like the Phillies, you know, you got a lot of big salaries, a lot of expectations, and you know, and these fan bases, I mean, San Diego is probably not as hardcore as the East Coast is. They're probably, you know, the media is probably not as hard. The fan base obviously isn't as hard, but I think a lot goes to it when you have that mix of free agents and you know, that kind of pressure to perform. It's kind of a walkie type thing. You know what I mean? It's really, I don't know. I just think it takes time.
Yeah. And the Padres are kind of similar to the Phillies last year, which is what the Phillies showed. It's like, I would be scared to play them in the playoffs, but they got to get there first. And I'm a little scared for their sake that they might not get there. That's kind of the spot they're in right now.
Yeah. 100%.
Last question. I know we're up against it because we got first pitch is in a few minutes here. So we got to get her going. The last question, I'll let you take one too, Rob, real quick. Athletics, future Las Vegas Athletics. Will they have the worst record of all time? This is a middle to low end AAA team. Your prediction right now at 10 wins currently. Do they eclipse the heralded Tigers and Mets?
I think yes. This team is so bad. I went and watched them live. The O's somehow lost a game to them. They took 3 out of 4 of them in Baltimore, and I was at one of the games. The Orioles probably played, actually I went to 2 of those 4 games in that series. The Orioles played 2 of their worst games of the year and won both those games that I was at against the Athletics. I mean, that team is so bad. And here's the thing. I mean, you got the Astros, you got the Mariners, you got the Rangers, and really the Angels. You got 4 teams going for it in their division too. So it's not like there's another team who's kind of tanking a little bit or not taking it seriously. Like all 4 of those teams want to win right now. Now, some of them are better than others at actually doing it, but all 4 of those other teams want to win right now. And they're just going to beat up on the A's. It's bad. It's really bad.
Not great. Not great. Connor, I'm going to hold your feet to the fire a little here. Like I said, this is a gambling show. And you're not going to be able to dance around this. AL East. Who wins the AL East crown this year? Do the Rays hang on? Is it Baltimore? Is it the Yankees?
You know what? Despite all the injuries, I'm going to still take the Rays. I mean, this team is just finding a way. They're finding a way. They've got guys coming up. And here's the thing that scares me about the Rays. The worst part of their team right now is their bullpen. But we know that the Rays could just walk down the street by my apartment right now, find 3 dudes, and turn them into above league average relievers. We know the Rays can do that. So if your worst link is the thing you're the best at patching quickly, it makes me think that not that they're scuffling at all, but they're just kind of injured right now. It makes me think that they'll be fine. And now, do I think they'll win the World Series? No, I don't. But I do think they have the sustainability and the depth to win the division.
All right. Well, there you have it, folks. Connor, phenomenal. You're our baseball guru, our go-to guy. Where can the good people find you? They want to hear more baseball, more O's talk. Where can they find you, brother?
Yeah, check out the Locked On Orioles podcast wherever you get your pods, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, kind of quick 30-minute episodes to get you into work in the morning. We're also on YouTube, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube page. And if you'd like to follow any more Orioles musings on the internet, it's at Locked On Orioles on Twitter.
All right, that'll do it for us. Apologies to anybody who wanted us to talk about the Mets or Phillies. We wanted to keep this show to just about teams who matter. So on that sad note,
I've already cried enough, so it's fine.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's been a horrible year for you. Coming up next week, SEC Mike, we're talking foosball in the South. He's coming on, big times, big things ahead. Check us out at the Pulse Sports Network. So for Connor, for Rob, take care, brush your hair, and we'll see you after a while.